the summer of 1984, on July 29th, I was living alone. I'd gone to bed and heard a noise in my room with me and felt a presence in the room with me. Again, I lived alone, and then something brushed against my left arm. And when I opened my eyes, I noticed the top of someone's head. It quickly jumped on my body, put a knife to the left side of my throat, and told me to shut up or I was going to die.
This episode is brought to you by Pause, Breathe, Reflect, the app that can help bring more mindfulness to your everyday moments. Imagine what would be possible if more people could live more mindfully. Hey there, my fellow like-hearted humans. It's Michael, and this is the Kintsugi Podcast. And this week's story of connection is a special one. One I know you're going to want to share. Our guest is a like-hearted human just like you. She's a partner, a friend, a leader. And in full transparency, we're going to talk about some very sensitive topics because she also survived a sexual assault. And she became an advocate. And she helps others see folks who normally go unseen. Her name is Jennifer Thompson. And I first heard her story on 60 Minutes. Being a faithful watcher of 60 Minutes for as long as I can remember, I saw her story. And even though I've watched 60 Minutes almost every week over the last 30 years, there are only a few stories that really stuck with me. And Jennifer's story, which is also shared by Ronald Cotton, stayed with me. And then several months ago, 60 Minutes did an update on their story. And when the story opened, people were breaking pottery. And in a moment, I knew exactly what they were doing, what they were workshopping. And so did a whole bunch of people who know this show. So my phone started to light up, as they say. They were doing a workshop on Kintsugi. When I think about Jennifer Thompson and her story and her work and the story she shares with Ronald Cotton, I can't help but not think of Kintsugi. Their pottery shattered, and together they've worked on bringing it back together and highlighting those scar lines as golden symbols of forgiveness, of strength, of resilience, of healing. And the work that Jennifer does today with her organization, Healing Justice, does this work of healing, of trying to right the harm that's caused by wrongful convictions and a social justice system here in this country that is far from perfect. So if you're ready, let's take a healthy breath in and a nice slow releasing breath out. As you get ready to listen to Jennifer Thompson and her story of Kintsugi. Hey, Jennifer, great to see you.
Hey, Michael, good to see you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. So I always love to start off with this question. How is your central nervous system doing today?
Oh, central nervous system is trying to stay regulated. In between trying to clean up cat vomit and figure out an electrician. But yeah, I always build in time to get into the woods. So that's how I kind of center and ground and regulate my body.
Very cool. Yeah, I was going to ask you a little bit about that as we get a little bit deeper. So we might come back to that. But
sure.
So here's a question I do like to ask pet owners. Do you own a spot bot?
Apparently I don't, because I'm looking at you with big eyes.
So a spot bot for like pet owners, it's like a mini version of a rug cleaner.
Okay.
So it's a combination of vacuum and wet mop all automated. And so when I heard cat vomit, I've been there, along with other bodily functions from our furry creatures. So our spot bot has gotten a big workout over the years. So,
I'll look into it. So
it's a good gift. If you're looking to buy a gift for any pet owner, if they don't already have it, it might be a good gift to put on the gift registry. So, all right. So since this is a show about connection, I always love to ask, how did you meet your husband? How did you meet your partner? Because my wife and I love a good connection story. Yeah. So can you share how you and your husband met?
Sure. So I started off my journey as a advocate for capital punishment for the death penalty. And that's a long story, but it's just kind of like where my life began and the values that were instilled in me about the criminal justice system. Fast forward, 20 years, I had begun to understand and really educate myself on the complexities of the criminal justice system, who gets justice, who doesn't get justice, that type of thing. So at this point in 2010, I was a strong abolitionist for the death penalty. And so I was invited to a panel at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill to participate about death penalty and race and how race is applied to that kind of part of justice. And my husband is a political science professor, so he was on the stage with me. Very, very romantic, Michael. Super, super romantic.
Super romantic.
Super romantic.
Panel discussion.
Whoa, exactly.
Bring out the flowers and the chocolates and the champagne.
But we met. I didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to it, but I was back on campus about 4 months later with the book that had been chosen for the Common Core read for the students that were coming into the 2010 school year. And he was a student discussion group leader. I saw him again, and that was much more fun. So, and I think, one of the things about my husband and I, what was important for me, and I'd finally learned at the ripe old age of 48, is that having values and a moral compass that is similar is really important to a happy relationship.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, as a couple, you need to be on the same page as like, hey, where are we going? Buddy or gal or whatever.
That's right.
How are we going to travel together? As the kids would say, we're on this journey, so we might as well have a journey that's like based on a foundation of values and ethics, and we're on the same page. And, as I think about that first encounter with your husband, it's probably good you weren't fawning all over each other, because that would have been a really awkward panel at that point in time. So it's good that you kept it till later.
Yeah.
It's a good story, though. I like that. That's pretty awesome.
Thanks.
Like just how people come together and connect. So, so as people get to know you, we're going to take your work that you do current day to the side. How would you describe who you are?
Oh gosh, if I had to describe who I am, I mean, I think I am a champion for the marginalized, for the erased, for the forgotten, for the unnoticed. That's probably the space I take up the most in, and I always disliked bullies. I've always kind of needed to sit on the sidelines with people who are generally ignored or left out. And I think that would be how I would describe myself.
Yeah, that's great. I see, like, knowing your work, and as I mentioned before we hit record, I first found your work when I was watching 60 Minutes a long time ago, 2009, that you help people be seen. And I think we all just want to be seen, and really feel like we belong. And in so many places, in so many areas of our society, people are not seen or not heard or not loved. And you help those in marginalized spaces with maybe marginalized voices in the past be heard and seen. And such an important ripple that you're putting into the world. And I can't wait to dive into the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
So I grew up, we're about the same age. So I grew up believing like a crime happens, people figure out who done it, watching Perry Mason and now like Law and Order. And it seems so, so simple, so straightforward. Like you get the bad guy and the bad guy is held accountable. And it's easy and there's closure and people move on. And so as I watched your piece and your story on 60 Minutes, and we'll get into, I'd love for you to share your story that led to the work you're doing today. I was like, she's sharing a reality that is quite foreign to like what I thought reality was.
Right.
Because I thought it was pretty clean because you can put the whole story in a 1-hour episode on TV. Right. And then move on to watching Gilligan's Island or whatever I was watching back in the day. So from that position, can you like help us? We'll flash back to where your story began. You were in college, and I'll turn it over to you to sort of share that piece to the degree that you want to share. And I know you share it pretty openly, so people get to know your story, and we can get into the work you're currently doing today, which is just amazing.
Yeah, thank you. So like you, Michael, I thought the same thing. I thought, when a person's arrested, a person's handcuffed, a person's at trial, a person's convicted and sentenced, done, right? The victim on the prosecution side gets the justice, as you said, gets closure, and then the defendant, the person who's done the crime, goes to prison, and that's it. That's the end of the story. And boy, is that so not true. So in 1984, as a college student, that's where my position was. That's the way the system worked. And in the summer of 1984, on July 29th, I was living alone. I'd gone to bed and heard a noise in my room with me and felt a presence in the room with me. Again, I lived alone, and then something brushed against my left arm. And when I opened my eyes, I noticed the top of someone's head. He quickly jumped on my body, put a knife to the left side of my throat, and told me to shut up or I was going to die. And, in those moments of being, asleep and now awake, and it's shocking, you don't understand what's happening, my mind really tried to process what was happening to me. And it was very clear that this was someone I didn't know, that I was in terrible danger, and I very quickly learned that his intent was to rape me. And I didn't know if he was going to kill me afterwards, but I certainly knew that what was happening to me was very serious, and I was in terrible, terrible danger. Of course, this is before cell phones, this is before a lot of things, and I made the decision that night to try to stay very calm and not physically fight, because I knew that there was no way I could win. But I knew that I was smart, and I hadn't been drinking alcohol. I wasn't under the influence of drugs, so my mind was pretty clear. I also have a really good memory, and so throughout the assault, I tried to take a lot of time when I could in those moments to pay attention to his voice and his face and different things about him. He tried to kiss me, and I turned my head, and it saved my life when he said, relax, I'm not going to hurt you. But I had turned my head because I was going to vomit, and I didn't want to choke to death. But I used that opportunity to tell him that I had a fear of knives, and if he could get off of me. And I could hear the knife hit the car hood, which was in the front of the apartment complex. I would let him back in, and he believed me. So it was that first moment, since he had started to rape me, that I really felt like I might have a chance here. So he pretended to drop the knife out and came back in and grabbed my arms, and I wasn't going to go back into the bedroom. So I told him I had to go to the bathroom. And he told me to hurry up. When I went into the bathroom, I had grabbed a blanket at the edge of my bed because I knew I had to stand close enough to him to figure out how tall he was and everything. I went into the bathroom and turned the light on because the police would ask me about lighting, and I knew that. So he quickly said, turn the light off. I did, and I was trying to figure out a plan, and I realized he had said during the assault he'd come through the back door. So my plan was to get to the back door. That maybe the door was open. So when I came out of the bathroom, I told him I needed a drink of water. And he told me to make him a drink and we would have a party. And I told him, okay, yeah, I'll make you a drink. And when I walked towards the kitchen, and again, this is not a big apartment, but he was kneeling down, turning on my stereo, trying to find a radio station, thinking we were going to have a party. And when I got into the kitchen, I began to make a lot of noise with water and ice cubes and cabinet shutting, and I just pulled my blanket tight and took off running. He, of course, chased me through the dark, through the neighborhood, and I determined that the only way I could survive was to somehow find light. And if I could get underneath some type of light, maybe he would stay away from me, or maybe somebody would see it. So I jumped to a carport and banged on the door, and fortunately people were home, and they let me in, and I fainted. We called the cops, and canines came to try to pick up the scent, but it was lost in the rain, and I would be taken to the hospital to have a rape kit done. And it would be in the hospital that I learned that he had left my apartment and broken into another woman's house about a mile away, and assaulted her and beat her and bit her, and so she was down the hall. I could hear her screaming.
Down the hall in the hospital.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. So I was taken to the police station to basically gather information, and a lot of that was my memory. And the police were asking me questions. I was able to give good detail, which led to a composite sketch, which led to suspects that went into the newspaper, and phone calls were coming in. But one phone call came in and said that we needed to look at a guy named Ronald Cotton, that he had been seen outside of the apartment complex wearing the exact clothes that I had described, that the second victim had described. I mean, it was identical. Navy blue shirt, 3 white stripes on those sleeves, white knit gloves, khaki fatigue pants, slip-on dark canvas boat shoes. I mean, like, it was just exactly the same. And so this woman who said I'd seen the same person on a bike outside of the apartment complex, which is where I lived at the time of my assault. And he would be brought in for questions. I was brought into the police station 3 days after the assault to do a photographic lineup. I was given, lots of kind of like warnings. Don't feel compelled to choose anybody. Suspect may or may not be in there. But, the truth is, Michael, the police have called you down to the police station.
Yes.
And are showing you 6 photographs. And so you know that they've got a suspect in that 6.
Yeah, you know enough to be like, this is the process.
Right. You wouldn't have called me down here if you didn't.
Yeah, so it's already setting you up to select someone.
Exactly.
And you're thinking, just playing it back, like, you are clear-headed, you weren't drinking, good memory, almost, it sounds weird to say, almost like the perfect victim. Right. Because you were so clear-headed. Right. And you're thinking, okay, they have the guy. Right. I just got to find him. I just got to find him. I know who he was. I got a good look of him. At least I think so. And then, so please continue.
Well, I picked out the photograph, and the police looked at me and said, that's who we thought it was. And so that was pretty good to hear, right? I've gotten it correct.
You did a good job, right?
I did a good job.
You did it right.
I did it right. The second victim had been punched and bitten, and a pillow over her face and a flashlight in her eyes, and she couldn't make an identification. So it was left really up to me. And so Ronald Cotton would be arrested that day. It would be August 1st of 1984. And then I was called back down to the police station about a week later to do a physical lineup. And, you had mentioned Perry Mason and Law and Order, and, you see these moments where the witness or the victim goes into the police station. There's that one-way glass.
Yeah, you're behind the glass. Right? No one sees you.
No one can see you, but the room that the police department was using was being renovated, so they took me to an abandoned school on the second floor, and I was brought to the lineup in a room with nothing between me and the lineup except a folding table.
Wow.
And I was terrified. And I was,
I imagine,
again, I was given the same warning. It was terrible. And I picked number 5, wrote it on a piece of paper, and the police looked at me and said, that's who you picked out in the photograph. And so I felt really confident. My confidence had been elevated to 1,000,000. And then we went to trial in 1985, State versus Cotton. And at the end of 2 weeks, Ronald would be found guilty of all charges. First-degree rape, first-degree break and entering, first-degree sex offense, and would be given life in 54 years. And again, to your point, the system looked at me and said, that's over now.
Yeah.
You get to put this behind you. These were the words, right? Put this behind you. You get to move on.
But you're still dealing with it.
Well, yeah. I mean,
right?
I'm not unraped.
Yeah. So.
I'm not untraumatized.
Yes.
But it's over, they say.
And they're telling you, let it go, Jennifer.
Yeah, move forward.
Yeah.
Move forward.
Move forward.
But you can't move forward because there's nothing to move forward to. The people around you don't want to talk to you about it. The people around you are tired of you crying. The people around you, don't call you anymore. And so you're really left to figure out this healing process on your own. And it was very, very messy.
I can imagine, because back then, too, we didn't have the knowledge about how to heal as, say, we do today, right? There was no YouTube to Google, to make it, sort of simple. But, therapy wasn't as commonplace back then as it is today. So our awareness about resources pales compared to what we know today. So how did you, those early days,
drugs and
what was
alcohol.
happening? Oh, okay. So a lot of numbing the pain.
A lot of numbing, because you just don't want to feel your skin.
Yeah,
because
sure.
my skin was the crime scene.
Yes.
So you just numb it. If you can't feel it, even for a few hours, you might can breathe. I mean, this is again back in the day when the logic model was just don't talk about it, don't ask her about it, make it light, right? Make it happy. And for people who have been in unbelievable trauma, what we actually need is talk about it.
To talk about it, get it
You
out.
talk about it. Nobody wants to talk about it, so you're holding it, right? It's making a home in your cells, in your body, in your bones. It's in there, and when it would come up, numb it, and it would come up again, make it go away, and that's kind of what I did until I thought I was going to die from it, and so I kind of came out of a cocaine, vodka-induced stupor, was able to graduate. But then in 1987, the North Carolina Court of Appeals decided to overturn the decision and called for a new trial. This is where I like to talk about closure is a myth, and we need to stop using that word.
Yes.
Because the criminal justice system really doesn't have closure. And nor does trauma.
No. Yeah, there is no closure.
There's no closure. You don't close it. So the second trial was in 1987. Again, it was another 2 weeks of my life of being torn apart, opened up. And I often liken the criminal justice system process as tornadoes that just blow through your body, right? And there's just pieces of you that they're just everywhere. They're scattered. And every time these things happen, you kind of walk around in your life looking for something that might resemble your life before, right? The wedding album, the teacup from your grandmother, something that didn't break that you could pick up and go, oh, I remember this.
Yeah.
This was part of my life, right? But because of the way the system works, it is just one tornado after another tornado after another tornado. And pretty soon, there's not much left that even remotely resembles what you had.
Yeah, it's blown all over the place
All
for miles,
over the place.
and
Yes.
you can't locate anything, and if you do, it's not in the same form it was originally.
It's shredded and broken and mildewed and water damaged. It's terrible. So after that trial, Ronald was found guilty again. This time, though, he was given 2 life sentences and 30 years. And again, it's, now you really get to move on, Jennifer. Really.
Yeah. Now, second time.
Yeah.
If the first time you didn't let it go,
right.
Here's a second chance, Jennifer.
Yes,
exactly. Let this one go.
Now, really let this one go.
Get on with your life.
Yes. So I got married and I got pregnant, and then I gave birth to triplets in the spring of 1990,
wow.
which was this affirmation to me that I can't die now, right?
Yes.
You can't die, Jennifer. You got these 3 little people that need you. So, and I loved it. I loved being a mom. You had purpose. I did. I had a reason I had to get up in the morning. Like they were 6 little eyeballs looking at me and meeting me.
Absolutely. Mom, tell us what to do.
Right. And then in 1995, I got a visit that from the detective of the case, and said that there was a request for DNA testing. And my blood sample had disintegrated after 11 years from the break tipped. So I'd have to submit to a new blood sample. And I said, yeah, let's do it, because I know who did it and you know who did it, and we need to be done with this thing. Like at some point you can't keep coming back to my life. So I gave them the blood, and 3 months later the DNA test came back and conclusively showed that it was not Ronald Cotton, that it had actually been a serial rapist by the name of Bobby Poole, who had been allowed to remain out in the community and commit 24 other violent crimes, 6 of which were first-degree rapes. And I mean, that was the moment in my life where I honestly thought that I was just going to crawl into a big black hole and never resurface, just never, ever resurface. It was probably one of the worst moments of my life, because you have to reconcile a lot.
Yeah, so crushing. Like, you were so certain.
I was so certain.
A couple times. Like, this is, as they say in, I guess, police work, an open and shut case. Right now, it seems like a good time to take a moment to pause, breathe, reflect. And when we come back, Jennifer will share more of her story and the work she's doing today to help others heal in our Kintsugi spirit. So wherever you may be, settle into a comfortable position. If you're driving, keep your eyes open. Also, if you're walking, eyes open, please. For everyone else, you may wish to close your eyes if it feels safe to do so. And we're simply going to take 3 generous inhales and releasing exhales. So let's drop in. Breathing up fully through your nose if you can. And allow the breath to release. Relaxing into this moment. A nice full breath in, feeling the lungs expand. Really noticing your in-breath. And then slowly release the breath. And we'll do one more. Nice healthy breath in. And a slow releasing breath out. All right, nice job. It's good to take a moment every now and again to pause, breathe, reflect. And in this case, reflect on what is currently resonating with you as Jennifer shares her story. There are over 600 meditations on our Pause, Breathe, Reflect app to help you bring more mindfulness to your everyday moments, sharpen your focus, let go of stress, and fully step into life. And for your first year, you can pay what you can, which means you can pay as little as $1 to be part of our community. And you can download it today, perhaps after you finish the episode, from the Apple App Store or Google Play. And I hope you'll join our community so we can put a beautiful ripple into the world together. All right, let's go back to my conversation with Jennifer to hear more of her story and the work she's currently doing to make a difference in this world.
Right. And to your words, Michael, I was literally the perfect victim, and I had been called that. And to know that not only was I failed, and that Ronald Cotton was failed, and that his family was failed, but the entire community was failed, because the guilty person was committing additional harms. An innocent person had languished in prison, and I didn't receive what the system had promised me, which was justice. And that's where you sit in that space, right? That this had been an epic fail on a very large scale.
Yeah, a massive ripple effect.
Yeah, what do you do with that?
It's just not you and Mr. Cotton. It's everyone that touches you, that knows you, the community, people that don't even know either one of you, because as you mentioned, it ripples out into the community because the perpetrator, the actual rapist, was still at large.
That's right. We call those concentric circles of harm in the work I do, thinking about everybody who touches this case, right? I mean, obviously there's me, the original crime victim in my family. There's Ronald and his family. But what about the jurors?
Sure.
What is their trauma like when they open the newspaper and think, oh my God, like I was asked to sit on this jury for $12 a day and receive information that may not be complete or may not be truthful. What about their experiences? What about the judge? What about the police, the prosecutor, the defense attorney, the community, the other victims that were hurt? I mean, there's so many people that get harmed in these cases.
And for the jurors, or really anyone, but for the jurors, as you mentioned them, it takes a lot to hear a story like yours. I imagine the court case was very detailed, very graphic. Mm-hmm. And, you hear your story, and in stories like yours, and you can't help but not be changed. Right. So you're consuming this trauma, and that's a significant burden for someone to carry, and you just can't simply just forget it. I imagine some people try to compartmentalize it, but once you hear it, you can't unhear it.
That's right. That's right.
So you're at this moment where it's an absolutely crushing blow, and you're thinking, like, how am I going to go forward? And you have your 3 children, and mm-hmm. you have your life, but still, you've reached your nadir, your low point, right? Mm-hmm. In all this, and there comes a time where you and him meet again, right? So.
Yes. So Ronald was exonerated on June 30th, 1995, and we didn't talk about this stuff. I mean, DNA
Sure.
was such a new thing. Ronald was the first DNA exoneration in North Carolina. So there wasn't a whole lot of talk about the experiences of people impacted by it. And so my plan, because I had these 3 little 5-year-olds, was to make myself invisible to the universe. Because I just was afraid of being discovered, right? The world was looking for me.
Yeah,
I
like
knew that.
like, hey, Jennifer, you put an innocent man in
Oh my
prison,
God.
right?
Do you know how many times I have heard that language, and it's so
like it's all on you.
Oh yes,
Right?
people
Like that, I imagine
literally.
that's what's
Yes.
like. It's you're part of a whole. You're a person within a system, but the vitriol, like I'm guessing here. Correct me if I get this wrong. Like it's all directed toward you. This person that's put an innocent man in jail. Shame on you
Right.
for getting this wrong.
You should die.
Yeah, I imagine you
should
probably
die.
got some. I think you shared in maybe one of your TED Talks that you did get death threats.
Yeah. Still do.
Wow. Yeah, even today.
Even today. Wow. Yeah, because again, the narrative is that Jennifer Thompson put Ronald Cotton in prison.
Yes.
But Jennifer Thompson doesn't have the power to put anybody in prison, first of all.
Sure,
if I did, there would probably be some additional people in prison. But I don't have that power. The state of North Carolina put Ronald Cotton in prison.
Yeah.
But what I've tried to help people understand, and it is like a slow slog, is that an innocent person cannot go to prison unless there's a bad person out there committing harm. So Ronald Cotton couldn't have gone to prison if Bobby Poole hadn't been out there literally raping people. I mean, he raped 2 women in one night. He tried to break into my neighbor before me. He went on to rape so many other women and knew all along that an innocent man was in prison for what he had done. Yeah. And yet, in the almost 40 years, it'll be 40 years this July, in the 40 years, not one single person has ever looked at me and said, oh my God, this is all Bobby Poole's fault.
Oh.
No one. Not to mention the fact that I was set up by using flawed police procedures and giving all kinds of verbal and nonverbal affirmations that had gotten it right. Right? So you kind of like led through this process, which happens all the time. It happens to victims who are set up or witnesses who are set up to pick out an innocent person. It's also a system that's set up to encourage innocent people to confess to something that they never did.
Yeah.
Right?
And so we get to this point, and the system's like, okay, now we got our guy.
Okay.
Right? And Ronald, Ronnie, and you, like, okay, time to move on again. Like, yeah, there was a wrong committed. Like, we got this wrong, but okay, let it go and move on with your lives, right? And my sense is that you were both sort of left without any type of support to like pick up the pieces and move on. And there's no playbook for this because this is all new. Like you both had to figure out like, well, how do we do this?
Yeah. And where do we put this, right?
Yeah.
Like, where do we put this experience? Where do we put this grief? Where do we put this harm? Where do we put the trauma? Like, what do we do with this? And so what I decided to do was, and this took 2 years, to meet with Ronald. Because I knew that there was no way I could even begin the healing journey unless I knew Ronald as an innocent man, not as something that my brain had conjured up. So we met in the spring of 1997 in a church not far from where the rape had happened 13 years prior. And yeah, he walked into the room and I just started to cry, like not just like normal cry. It was like big, ugly, sobbing cries.
Yeah.
And Ronald came over and he was crying and we took each other's hands and what we knew intuitively that we needed was answers that only the other person had, right? Only Ronald could answer the questions that I had, and only I could answer the questions that Ronald had.
Sure.
And so we were able to sit for those 2 hours and share what those years had been like and what had happened to us, and ask each other questions and get those answers that had, really evaded us for all that time. And at the end of the 2 hours, we ended up in each other's arms and friends and crying and promising that this journey had been shared. This is a shared journey. It's a shared trauma, shared pain, different experiences, but shared, hurt. And that was the first time in 13 years that the little pieces from all those tornadoes that had been blown all over the place found their way back home. Mm-hmm. And I could physically feel my body beginning to repair some of those broken places.
Yeah, it was shedding the trauma.
It was the beginning.
The beginning. Mm-hmm. And that's the beginning of the healing process, being mm-hmm. able to start sometimes very slowly, sometimes maybe with a bigger leap, but shedding of the trauma and the hurt.
Yeah. And we can only do that by telling our stories.
Yeah, it's out loud, it's out in the open, it's sharing that, it's the connection with the other person, right? Mm-hmm. Like you both needed each other in that moment to mm-hmm. share your story, share your experience from what brought you together. Mm-hmm. Only the two of you could really do that.
Right.
Right. No one else could really play that role.
That's exactly right.
And so you leave, you hug, there's crying. I imagine it's a whole big adrenaline release after a couple mm-hmm. hours after the fact. And you stay in contact mm-hmm. with Ronald. And this experience then leads you to forming the organization, the nonprofit you have today, Healing Justice. So
yeah.
What was that spark, though, that said, okay, now this is the work we're going to do? Because now Ronald was the first one exonerated through DNA testing in North Carolina. And now more and more people over the years, we're starting to learn more and more about this, and more people are freed. It becomes something that, as a society, there's an invitation, a calling, a demand mm-hmm. to pay more attention to what's going on because we're getting this wrong.
Right. Yeah. So that was in 1997 that Ronald and I met, and honestly, as like all journeys that we undertake, you kind of get to a place where like, okay, well, that's good. Okay, now we're done.
Yes.
At the end of that.
Yeah.
And then,
more closure, right?
Yeah.
We're moving on.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. We're done now.
Yeah. Can we move on? How about those Tar Heels?
Right. And that can, it's just, it can be it. But for me, my journey has always been very organic in nature. Like I will tell you that not one thing has ever been planned. It's just always been something that kind of gets foisted and thrust in front of you, and I think that's part of the journey, right? So there's
Sure.
this thing, and you look at it and go, "Oh gosh, do I really want to do that, or should I take a right, or should I go left, or should I just go backwards? Like, what is this? What am I going to do?" And most of the things I've done, I've looked at it and seen the impact that it's having on human beings. And again, you asked me at the beginning, for me, it has always been, I've always tried to create safe spaces for people to step into.
Sure.
And so as I kind of moved forward, which forward at that point looked a lot like being ponied around by organizations that kind of got hold of me and just chewed me out for dinner. It was, let me take you here. Yeah. And tell
you're going to speak here about the social justice system and
or about how terrible it is for, exonerated individuals and how, the things that we need to do. And I did it. I can't even tell you the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of speeches I've given and testifying I've done in front of state legislators, different committees, trying to improve the system and reform the system and create policies and best practices. I've done that for so long. And what I realized at one point was I was actually being used.
Mm-hmm.
And I was being harmed.
Yeah, because no one's really asking you,
no.
How are you doing?
Nobody.
Right? So obviously Ronald's going through his healing process,
mm-hmm.
through his trauma, and so he's freed. Okay,
mm-hmm.
We're moving on. Ronald, heal, move on with your life. And no one's asking about you.
Right.
And the pain and the additional trauma now that you're carrying with you
mm-hmm.
on top of the initial trauma.
And the false narrative that presented to me, right? It was asking me to carry the burden for everything that's ever happened in the criminal justice system and to kind of be that poster girl. I was the poster girl.
Yeah.
And I thought that was what I was supposed to do. And the harm and the additional trauma, like those micro traumas that were occurring throughout those years. And then, of course, my children ended up getting the residue of those things, was incredibly painful. And at one point in 2013, our executive director, Katie Monroe, who at that point was working for the Innocence Project in New York, convened the very first ever panel of crime survivors from these cases. Kind of new, right? Let's hear what they have to say. Let's learn from their experiences. And when the question was asked of me, Jennifer, how did the wrongful conviction harm you? I fell apart because no one had asked me.
Mm.
And it was the first time I kind of stopped and I thought about what that had been like for me. The death threats, the blame, the victim blaming, the scarlet letter, the beating me up to a bloody pulp and asking me to be okay with it. But also hearing the two other survivors talk about the same experiences that no one had ever seen them. Like we had become erased in the narratives of our own stories. We got erased. I was erased in what happened to me. The two other survivors had loved ones who were brutally murdered. Their loved ones were erased in the exoneration story, right? So crime victims were just being pushed off the side to never, ever be talked to again.
Yeah,
and
you're trying to do the right thing, quote unquote,
mm-hmm.
the right thing,
mm-hmm.
most likely from a place of shame and guilt.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
To make this right.
Right, exactly.
Because the world's telling you how wrong you've been.
And even if you're murdered, you were still at your own fault. And that was the story. It was like, well, you shouldn't have been in that location when you were murdered. Yeah. You shouldn't have been a barmaid. You shouldn't have gone to that party. So what did you expect? Of course you got murdered. And so that's this idea of like blaming survivors and victims. So that 2013 really was that moment for me where I thought, you know what? Like we have got to begin talking about these stories truthfully. And there is space for everybody's story to be heard. What would it look like if we brought what Ronald and I did, which is sitting together and sharing, similar experiences, shared harms? What would it look like if we did that nationally? what would it look like if we had an organization that allowed crime victims, families, murder victim family members, innocent men and women, their family members, to sit in safe spaces and share stories about what had happened to them? Could we create healing on a national level, right? I mean, could we use restorative justice ideas, principles, values, guidelines in this work to help people kind of shift out of that space and help each other and themselves start that healing journey together? So in 2015, I launched Healing Justice.
When you think about healing, obviously the topic of forgiveness comes up. So how, and we'll get into exactly how you go about the healing, because that was one of the first things in the second episode of 60 Minutes you were on, where I saw what you were doing, and a whole bunch of people, as I mentioned before we hit record, a whole bunch of people were texting me after the fact, and they were like, she's doing Kintsugi. And I go, yeah, I know that, I'm watching. So, but before we get there, around forgiveness, how do you look at forgiveness when you bring these folks together? Because that is something I imagine is on a lot of people's minds.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how do you get to that place of forgiveness? Because that's so essential in the healing process.
It is, Michael. I will say, though, that I don't know that forgiveness is necessary all the time to get to that space of healing. I think there's some things that we just can't forgive. If someone murders your child in a brutal way, I don't think that you have to forgive that person. I think what you need to do, if you ever want to get to that place of healing, is to find your voice and take your agency back and find your power in your story. And maybe somewhere down the line, there's a space to say, I forgive this person, but I don't want anything to do with you, right? But I'm forgiving you because it's about me. It's about me living again. It's about me honoring my loved one. I think, and I would love to find a different word that we can use other than forgiveness, because I think we've created a vocabulary that thinks that is required in healing.
I like that perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it is required. I think it's okay if you do it, and it's also okay if you don't. I think where the healing journey is, and where the healing process is knowing that what you did to me is not okay. I'm never going to be okay with this. My life is going to have an empty space, but the experience, the journey has given me something bigger, right? In Healing Justice, we talk about the lost and found box. And we create them. We actually make our own lost and found box. And the idea is like, what did you lose in all of this? But what did you find? What are those
What did
gems?
you gain?
Yeah. Because there's always things we find. And I think that's where it is, right?
Yeah, I so appreciate your perspective that you just shared. And if I can take the liberty to pull back the word I used, essential, because even in my own experience, so that was a little bit of a default. I worked through what forgiveness looked like for me. And there's a woman, she passed away in 2019. She lived in Terre Haute, Indiana, but she was a Holocaust survivor, a twin. Eva Kaur was her name. And we actually got a private tour, like about 50 people, of Auschwitz. She led the way. And So she's sort of known for her forgiveness of the Germans, of the Nazis. And it's not without controversy. Like, there's a lot of controversy, as you mentioned, for some people. There's just no forgiving. And so there are a lot of people that, of course, went through the Holocaust that disagree with her stance and this position of forgiveness that she proclaimed. But so she shared this because I was having difficulty even forgiving the driver who hit me and, damaged my life and the whole thing. And she said, like, listen, I've forgiven them, not because they deserve forgiveness, but because I do, right? So when you talk about agency, she didn't use that word, but she was saying, like, I didn't want them to take my power. I didn't want them to take my agency away because I've gained so much, and I want to put, now my word, a bigger ripple into the world. And if I carry that burden of animus or anger against them, that's going to dampen the ripple I put into the world. So your lost and found, she lost so much, but then she found her voice and her strength, which, changed lives after the fact when she came here.
Yeah, and it's absolutely true. There's a great book called The Sunflower, which talks about exactly what you're talking about, and it's set in World War II, and it's this question of, like, should I forgive the Nazis, the Germans, for killing my family, or, should I not forgive them? And so I think where I like to sit with that is, I think everybody gets to take their healing journey the way they need to take their healing journey. There are some things that the survivors and victims that I work with that will tell you, there's no way I'm ever forgiving the person who killed my mother. And plus, we don't even know who it is, but I'm not going to ever get to that space. What can I do? And this was my experience, was that I was not going to let Bobby Poole have another minute of my life. He had taken so much from me that he wasn't going to get tomorrow. Does that look like forgiveness? Maybe, maybe not. But I can tell you it certainly freed me from letting him own my voice, and own my story, and own my happiness. Like, I just wasn't going to give that to him. So I do want to find, and I struggle, like, there's got to be a better word.
There's got to be a better word.
There's got to be a better word. There's got to be a better word.
Better word. We got to come up with a better word.
Right.
Yeah. So around healing, I know the work you do at retreats and then the other programs, you bring a lot of experiences into the healing process. You just mentioned the lost and found box, but I was hoping you could bring us into a retreat, because they're long. I think they're 4 days long, right?
Yeah.
So how do you go about the process? Because I imagine the participants come in, at least some of them, with some reluctancy to say, what's this going to be? I think they probably all know this is going to be hard. This might be the hardest thing I do in my life, or at least one of them. So how do you create that community of belonging, that safe space that allows for healing to begin?
Yeah, well, the first thing we have to do is make sure that the people that are coming in are ready for the process, right?
Sure.
And so there's a lot of information we give them at the beginning, like, this is what circle looks like, and this is what, your days will look like. So people don't come in and think, oh, I'm going to retreat and I'm going to get my nails done. It's like,
so we're going to go to the spa and we're going to go golfing.
There's no spa, there's no sailboat, there's no swimming pool. It's it's really hard work. And some people aren't ready to sit in space with people from different experiences. So in other words, not always will it look like crime victims, survivors, and exonerated individuals and families. Sometimes it will look like only crime victims and survivors. And that's what we call peer support retreats. Some of them are only exonerated individuals. Some of them are exonerated individuals and families. And then sometimes the one you saw on 60 Minutes is what we call mixed. It's victims who are ready to explore the experiences of exonerated individuals, and it's exonerees who are ready to listen to the experiences of crime victims. They're almost never from the same case, and that's not because we can't do it that way. It's just victims have been treated so poorly in these cases that we have a very hard time finding them. We can find exonerees very, very easily, but victims have been so marginalized for decades and decades and decades that at this point they're like, you know what, I don't really trust anybody. And I think that's fair.
Well, they're hiding, right? Almost to your point, you wanted to hide
Sure.
from society.
Sure.
It sounds like it might be difficult to find them because they're doing what you tried to do.
Yeah.
Back
they don't want to be found.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Or they believe that the system has failed them once again. So when we do the retreats, however, it's a lot of setup initially. People generally know what they're coming into, although if you've never been, it's still quite an awakening. We will always have a short biography for every person so that as you're coming in, you know that John is from this experience and Linda's from that experience. So we don't really go into our stories necessarily during the retreats, which sounds very strange, but I'll try to tie that up as I'm speaking about it. Because of what I have found is that in these cases, it's not that hard to talk about the system failing us because it's been written in the newspaper, we've talked about it. What we have a hard time talking about is the grief we're carrying. Mm. And so that's what the retreats are for. It's really about exploring grief, harm, losses, and belongings. And that's the hard stuff. It's also the stuff that no one's asking us about.
Yeah, it's the inner work.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
To point to the system is that's external work.
Right, right.
It's the blame finger. It's the system.
Sure.
And then it's a transition into, and what about you? And we go within, and that's the hard work.
That's the ouch.
That
that's
not many people want to do.
Right.
But like as a society, we could actually be doing it.
We should be doing it.
We should be doing it. I think the pandemic was the invitation to be like, hey, after you finish your sourdough, let's do some inner work.
Let's lean into
what's going on here, people,
right.
because
That's right.
Mother Earth and the universe, is telling us like, slow it down and take notice. But we decided to bake bread, although I do love a good sourdough.
Who doesn't love fresh bread out of the oven?
Yeah, absolutely. But we got to do some inner work. Yeah, it's the hard stuff.
Right. So the retreats are built on the circle process method, which, again, we sit in circle. Circles are important. There's no first and last. There's no beginning. There's no end. There's no front. There's no back. I mean, everybody's in equity, right? We built a circle. And we begin the circle by talking a little bit about the origins of circles, Native American circle process and how they built that, why it's so important. We talk about the talking piece. We talk about like kind of the nuts and bolts, the housekeeping of circle. And then we do introductions with each other, and it's generally something very different, right? It's like, my name is Jennifer, and the question might be, what's the weirdest thing you've ever done that no one would ever guess you did, right? And it's stuff like that kind of begins the storytelling. It's the beginning of the storytelling. Then we build the next part on our values and our guidelines. So guidelines have to be, and everything is done in consensus, by the way. Like everything has to be done in consensus, or you can't get the work done. So we set up our guidelines. People have to be, agree to them. We set up our values. Each person introduces a value into the circle. They talk about why that's important to them. Again, it's the beginning of the storytelling. I'm letting you into my life as to why trust is important to me, or why curiosity is a value that I bring in. Again, it has to be agreed on. So we do all these different activities to build consensus. The first big activity we do is something called shared objects, where I invite you to bring something from home that has a story to it. And they're often really difficult stories to tell. One of the guidelines that has to be agreed on is confidentiality. So when people begin to tell their stories, they know that they're safe in telling their stories, that they're not leaving the circle. These stories aren't going to go home to somebody else's dinner table. So I know I can trust you to tell you a story about my shared object. And everything has a response too. So after shared objects, people have an opportunity to respond to what they've heard, which in that sense tells you, I heard you.
Yeah.
I listened to you. I witnessed that with you. And I want you to know that. So that's part of why we build it the way we build. One of the harder things that we do is we talk about where our wounds were made. So that's probably the middle of the 4 days. That's the hard stuff. We kind of really dig into, what do your wounds look like? Where were they made? What color are they? And that's the tough stuff, right? It's where's your grief sitting?
Yeah.
And that's hard. It's hard for us to talk about.
Yeah, where is it trapped? Where does the body hold on to it?
Right. Is it in your back? Is it in your shoulders? Is it in your gut?
Where do you feel it?
Where are you feeling it? It often has a color. There's a lot of things that we explore. We do a lot of grounding, centering. And
my color is turquoise.
Is it?
Yeah, because my accident happened in New Mexico. So when I think of New Mexico, when I see turquoise, it takes me back. You know, orange is my balancing color to it. That's why it's my favorite color.
Mine's yellow. So
cool.
I think my harm. Generally, when I think about my harm, it's like a very fiery, hot, orangey red.
Yeah, red.
Because mine was a lot of anger for a long time.
Yeah.
So after we do the harm, again, we have time for responses where people can talk about what they've just heard. In all of our retreats, we do expressive art projects. So that is built into every single retreat. We've done masking, where I give everybody a mask and ask them to create what's the mask they wear for the world to see, but what's the inside of your mask look like. We do the Lost and Found art project. So I collect heart-shaped boxes every February 15th because they're 99 cents at Walgreens after Valentine's Day. And so our heart boxes are Lost and Found boxes. We do a project with old shoes where I ask people to think about the road they walked on and the shoes they walked in. What do they need other people to know about that journey? What do you want people to know about the shoes you wore? And all of them, of course, have got these very graphic visual stories in it that people can begin exploring with colors and textures. And so they work all weekend on their art projects. And then we do improv things on our last night together. Because we know that part of our healing is also laughter. It gets trapped in our belly.
Yeah. It's a dopamine release, you know.
Yeah. And for a lot of people, they haven't laughed in decades. There's nothing been funny.
I can imagine.
There's nothing been funny. But when you can laugh, when an exonerated person after 29 years of prison can stand beside a rape survivor and play games and laugh together, that is trust, right? Particularly
because you've created a safe environment.
Right. And the games we play are silly. Really, really silly. Like I'm asking you to be an animal.
Sure, yeah. It's like, whose line is it anyway?
Right. So I'm asking you to be silly, and being silly is trusting that I can do this with you. And you're going to laugh, and we're going to have a good time. We also always do a letting go ceremony, and we do that in different ways, where I ask people to think about the things they no longer want to carry. We write it, and then we burn it. And then our last day together, we show our art projects. We tell each other what we're trying to show them in this representation. And by then, you've built community, right? And when we build community, we can create safe spaces with each other. If you know you're safe and I know I'm safe, we can build a community together, right? And it's in that community that we build connections to each other. And when we build connections, Michael, that's where belonging occurs.
Yeah.
Like, I belong, you belong.
Yeah.
And when we feel like we belong, that's the healing.
Then we can heal. Yeah.
Then we can heal.
Yeah. I'm totally biased here, but I'm just curious, how often do you do Kintsugi?
Well, we've done Kintsugi that way that you saw 3 times. However, there's always Kintsugi. So when I do a retreat, if we're not doing it as a project, I usually have a survivor or an exoneree or a family member who's come to several retreats co-facilitate with me. And then I gift them a piece of Kintsugi that I created for them.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Kintsugi is always there.
Yeah. Oh, that's so great. Yeah. So like, I love the arc you bring people on in the 4 days. You, as the facilitator, though, have to carry a heavy load. Like hearing these stories. Mm-hmm. You mentioned it up front when we first began talking. You like to get out into nature. Is that the way you create some harmony and balance in your life? Because, you know, your day job, the passion work, the calling that you have from your experiences is listening to stories of trauma and hurt, and you're offering a chance to heal, but it's still heavy.
It's very heavy. The stories that
so is that
I hear
how
are
you
terrible.
Get grounded into nature as a way to stay stable and grounded?
Yes. Walking, hiking is how I process. So we all process differently. For me, it is always taking a walk and being out in nature. And what I've found, Michael, is that I can't process stories, like really hard stuff through me and move it, then I can't hold space for the next person who comes along. Right? Yeah. So I've got to find a way to like download and put it into a hard drive over here so I can create some more space in here for the next upload.
Yeah, you can't dive totally in the rabbit hole with people. You know, because then both people are in the rabbit hole, right? So it's like there's some like respectable distance or healthy distance. Like you're still there, you're still connected, you're still bringing that connection and trust and belonging. But you know, for you as a facilitator, there needs to be some like a healthy space so you can still continue to do the work that you want to do.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
How can people help you and find out more about what you guys are doing?
Well, I mean, there's a website, healingjusticeproject.org. I would love for every single listener to right this very minute, get their phones, and look at us, and sign up for emails, and because we're always updating you on stories and things that we're doing that's super interesting and actually impact our lives, your life, my life. Would love, of course, people to financially donate. All financial donations go directly to our services and our programs and the work that we do. Our executive director is the daughter of an exoneree. So we have people that are on staff and on our advisory board that have lived experiences. So all the donations we get go to help us continue to provide these programs and services to the individuals that we serve. So would love, 500 email signups and people willing to donate, even, sign up for $20 a month. That helps. That pays for paint.
Yeah, we're big believers here of small steps done consistently together over time brings about the change we seek in the world.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Yeah. Is there anything that I didn't ask you, but I should have asked you?
I think you did a great job. I guess in closing, I would love for people to really hear this message of the equity in narratives, the equity in stories, and how important it is to not victim blame, but to understand that when the system fails, and it so often does, that we're all impacted. It matters to all of us. And yeah, it all matters. All the stories matter. We all matter.
Yeah, all the stories matter. Every voice matters. I so appreciate you, Jennifer, and the work you're doing. And obviously we've gone through different traumas. And we've talked about this through our conversation, not to have a status game in trauma. The people on the internet try to do that. But trauma is trauma. And what I appreciate is that you've taken your hardest day. I call my accident my last bad day. So I'll use that language. Like your last bad day, and you've turned it into a beautiful ripple to help our society heal. So
thank you.
I appreciate the work you're doing, and I hope you'll get all those email downloads and donations, and we'll do everything in our power to make that happen.
Thank you, Michael. I so appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I'm so grateful for the work Jennifer is currently doing and how open she is with sharing her story. Her vulnerability is making a difference. And I hope you heard that in her story. I hope it resonated with you. And if it did, please let me know what really spoke to you. I hope you'll check out her organization, Healing Justice, and support them in any way that you can, and follow them along with Jennifer. Since we're a podcast, you got to have show notes. So in the show notes, I'll put all the different ways you can understand more of Jennifer's story and follow her and the work she's doing to put a positive ripple into the world. So Jennifer, thank you again for coming on. And thank you for making a difference in this world. And now I want to focus in on you, because I know your time is your most precious resource. So the fact that you decided to spend some of your time here listening to the Kintsugi Podcast means the world to me. We are a community, along with Pause, Breathe, Reflect, that is geared towards living mindfully, being thoughtful about life, celebrating life. And when we crack, we know we can heal. And when we heal, we celebrate our scars as golden symbols of strength and resilience. So the fact that you're here, that you make our community a bit larger so we can put a better ripple into the world, means so much to me. So thank you. And if you haven't yet left a kind review for the podcast, I hope you'll do it today, because that will help other people find our community so we can create more energy around healing and coming together and celebrating life fully. So again, thank you. And if you ever want to talk about how to prevent a bad moment from turning into a bad day, or your Kintsugi, or how to live more mindfully, or any of my speaking or coaching services, there's a calendar link in the show notes, and we can set up some time to connect. And until our next story of connection, remember, if you meet a challenging moment, and there'll be challenging moments between now and our next episode, remember to slow down and come back home. Come back to your breath. And know that you've got this, and here we've got you. It's how we put a beautiful ripple into the world. It's how we celebrate our golden symbols of strength and resilience. And, of course, it's how we have fun storming the castle. This episode is brought to you by Pause, Breathe, Reflect, the app that can help bring more mindfulness to your everyday moments. Imagine what would be possible if more people could live more mindfully.